welcome to the webinar. This is a webinar for Policy and Taxation Group, Family Enterprise USA, and BNY Mellon Wealth Management. I'm Pat Soldano. I am president of Family Enterprise USA, whose sole purpose and mission is to promote family businesses in the United States, generationally owned family businesses, and their job growth by advocating for them in Washington, D.C. We're very pleased to have with us today as special speakers, Ben McGloin, CFA, Head of Advice Planning and Fiduciary Services, and Ryan Szczepanik, Senior Wealth Strategist from BNY Mellon Wealth Management. Today, we're going to review the results of the 2022 Family Enterprise USA survey and the potential legislation that has affected family-owned businesses across the United States. You will note that this is being recorded. We're going to ask you to ask your questions in the Q&A, please. We will attempt to monitor those throughout the call. If we don't do a good job of doing that, we will absolutely ask questions and answer your questions at the end. So Ben McGloin is head of BNY Wealth Management, Advice Planning and Fiduciary Services Group. He has spent 25 years of industry experience in client investment and fiduciary roles, as well as a background in strategy and governance. In his role, Ben leads an extensive group of experts across the country, primarily dedicated to providing clients and their advisors with timely and important insights and advice, and actively managing their wealth, especially during these very difficult times. Ryan Szczepanik is a senior wealth strategist at BNY Mellon Wealth Management. He works closely with business owners, corporate executives, and families to provide trust estate and tax planning services. Before joining BNY Mellon, Ryan was a partner at a prominent trust estate and tax firm in the Bay Area, where he resides. Ryan is a California certified specialist in estate planning, tax, and probate law, a member of the executive committee of the Trust and Estates section of the State Bar, and was recently appointed by the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court to serve on the Probate and Mental Health Advisory Committee, which makes recommendations to the state judiciary for improving trust and estate law. So we're going to start with Ben, who's going to talk to us about BNY Mellon Wealth Management. And I am going to start the slideshow, and I'm going to share my screen. So then you can start the process.
All right, great. Thank you, Pat. Thank you for the introduction. More importantly, thank you for a great partnership between Family Enterprise USA and BNY Mellon Wealth Management. I think really the work that you all do, really representing and advocating for the families of family businesses in Washington is truly remarkable and really having an impact. And so really on behalf of all of our clients who either have or still own and operate a privately held business, we're very appreciative of those efforts, Pat. For those of you who perhaps are not familiar with BNY Mellon, we were founded back in 1784 by Alexander Hamilton. And so really with those 230-year plus of experience behind us, we've really built and evolved our advice to help our clients succeed. And as I mentioned, many of those clients are private business owners, either currently today or maybe having exited. And so our services really range from investments, banking, to comprehensive wealth management. And we're really able to offer that advice from a broad, comprehensive viewpoint. And today, I think pretty remarkably, BNY Mellon touches about 20% of the world's investable assets on a daily basis. And really, so our main purpose and mission is to help our clients, whether they're individuals, institutions, to have better financial outcomes. So the vast amount of our experience and insight we've gathered really through working with families and institutions proves itself in some of these numbers, right? So we've got 305 billion of clients' assets under management, about 94% overall client satisfaction rate, and a 98% client retention rate. So, our clients, the families that we work, they really value the advice, and they feel like we are a really crucial part of managing their wealth. So, Pat, if you want to flip to the next, just to the next slide. For us, everything really starts with our clients, be they individuals, families, family offices, or institutions. And in fact, BNY Mellon was the first firm to start a dedicated family office business, which we established to support the Mellon family some 50 years ago at this point. And we've really built the family office business to acknowledge the greater need to offer institutional services to wealthy families. And really, I think what sets us apart is the exceptional resources, whether it's the investment management capabilities, investment services, family office management, wealth management, private banking, and so on. And so today, we serve many hundreds of family offices across the globe. We interface primarily with a dedicated family office, although more recently, we're starting to see more virtual family offices that are becoming certainly more prevalent with the progression of technology capabilities. But our approach really is to understand each of our clients' unique needs and really add the resources around them as needed. And so, Pat, if you want to flip to the next slide, I really want to talk about kind of how we help our clients, particularly our private business owner community. And really, again, back to kind of drawing on the years of experience that we have working with successful individuals and successful families, we developed 5 practices to help our clients achieve long-term financial success. And this includes investing, right? So investing to manage and maximize the impact of compounding, helping clients borrow strategically, the prudent use of leverage, spending, right? So really thinking about how to manage their spending, whether it's from a personal perspective or even managing through from a business perspective. Managing taxes, really critical for all of our clients, but ultimately protecting their legacy. And really this framework, we designed it to help our clients sustain the wealth over the coming decades. And we call this framework Active Wealth. And we know that this comprehensive support that we provide around these practices and also the proprietary technology is really designed to empower our clients to stay focused on what's important so that they can confidently navigate what is to come. And we know it works. In fact, consistently following this framework, following this advice has the potential to increase wealth accumulation by up to 5% on an annualized basis. So Pat, if you want to flip to the next slide, as I alluded to, amongst the many market segments that we service, we have extensive experience working with all types of business owners, whether they're serial entrepreneurs, early stage founders, multi-generational family businesses. And again, whether they're starting, growing, or experience a transition of their business, we really look to provide holistic, objective advice at each stage of the business cycle. And so we do truly understand the many opportunities, but also challenges, right, that business owners face across each of those stages, whether it's issues specific to their business, perhaps it's related to the overall economic and financial market cycles, or perhaps related to the plethora of tax policy concerns. We hear it time and time again, whether it's income tax, estate tax, capital gain tax, local tax. There's just so many issues and concerns that business owners and their families have as it relates to taxes. In fact, often we see successful business owners facing one similar problem, which is how do they ensure that a business remains family owned from one generation to the next. And we can really help lay the groundwork for sustaining a multi-generational family business, which really involves making critical decisions around the ownership, the management, family communication in a form of a governance structure. And this is really why our strategic partnership with Family Enterprise USA is so important. Collaborating and sharing our respective insights and experience really ensures that we are well equipped to develop the comprehensive solutions that our family business owners need to meet their financial objectives, maybe even deal and work through some of the family dynamics and again, some of the specific issues related to their business. So with that, let me turn it over to Pat to talk us through the 2022 Family Enterprise USA survey findings. Pat.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. And I'm going to do this a little differently because I'm hoping that this is going to show better in this format. So Ben, can you tell me, are you seeing the slides, and are you seeing two slides or one?
Just one. I'm just seeing the cover slide.
All right, perfect. Okay. So let's just get into the Family Enterprise USA survey. Once again, BNY Mellon has been an amazing sponsor, supporter of this survey. Family Enterprise USA does the survey on an annual basis, has done so since 2007. And I'm going to share the results, as Ben mentioned, of the survey. These are some of the organizations, in addition to BNY Mellon, who's our platinum sponsor, who help us distribute the survey. Some of these are family business centers, as you will see on the screen. Some of them are trade associations like the National Farm Bureau, Contractors Association, American Trucking Association. We're really, really appreciative of their support and sending the survey out so we can get these results. What's really important for family business owners to understand is their power in Washington, D.C. They really are an economic powerhouse in this country. As you can see from this graphic, they generate 59% of the jobs in this country, or 83 million jobs. 54% of the GDP, or $7.7 trillion. That is huge in our economy. So let's talk about the statistics on who actually responded to our survey. And this has been pretty typical year after year. 80% of them are sole owners, majority owners. 56%, I should say, are sole owner. 80% are sole or majority owners. So the decision makers are the ones who are answering our survey, which is really important. 90% of them are CEO, chairman, senior management. That's their role in the business. This is the first year we've asked this question, which is really important because many of family businesses operate as a pass-through entity. And that means they're operating as an LLC, an LP, a trust, something different than a C Corp. 79% of family businesses operate as a pass-through entity. So we can tell members of Congress, please help the pass-through entity legislation, the 199A legislation, don't make it worse, because corporate America is still paying a 21% tax rate based on the last tax bill. And family businesses are paying 35, 37% in taxes. So please help them, don't hurt them with higher income taxes. Family businesses plan their business for the long term. So, and over 51% of them have actually been in business over 50 years. And 75% of them have been in business over 30 years. So again, a very important statistic. They plan their business as a legacy, not only for their family and their employees, but also for their community. We remind members of Congress that while this is a country of family farms, as you can see from this graphic, only 5% of those are family farms that answered this survey. In fact, 24%, you can see manufacturing, construction, real estate, all of those industries have the same characteristics that family farms have, which is this illiquid nature of their assets. So when you're considering legislation to help family farms, don't forget these other industries as well. In terms of the size of the revenue of these businesses, they typically are on the medium to larger size because that's when they're multi-generational. That's when they understand how important advocacy is in the United States. And so 32% of them have over 50 million in assets, and 15% have 21 to 50 million. Most of their businesses grew in 2021, as you can see the percents, and they expect similar kind of growth in 2022. They operate in multi-states. 35% of them are in 11 or more states, and in fact, 30% of them are in 21 plus states. Again, first year we asked this question about minority-owned businesses. Only 21% are actually women-owned, which I was kind of disappointed. I thought that would be a little higher, but we'll ask the question again in 2023 and we'll see what the answer is going to be. Salaries and benefits. We have learned that family businesses pay better than non-family businesses, and they give better benefits. This has been consistent year after year, except this year it was a little lower at 44%. Last year in 2021, it was actually 52%. So an important statistic for members of Congress to understand. Family businesses pay better than non-family businesses. Again, an important statistic. I should have mentioned at the beginning that this survey was conducted January 5th of 2022 through February 28th of 2022. So we were in the field 60 days, which is pretty typical. So remember, during that time frame, we were in the pandemic. We were at the beginning of the middle of the pandemic, but the beginning of the year. Generations of the business ownership. You can see the percent of second generation, third generation, and even some fourth generation. This tends to be pretty typical year after year. And we have a similar result with the management of family businesses in the second, third, and fourth generation. What do family businesses care about? Their sustainability is really, really important. They tell us that every year. 85% say they want to sustain their business for job creation. And in fact, 79% of them say this is a legacy for their children. The disappointing news is that only 51% of them have actually passed the business on to the next generation. And even less of those have passed on any sort of control, full or partial control. So I really encourage all of you family businesses that are on the phone, or you advisors that help family businesses, please have them work on succession planning. I know how difficult it is. There's lots of reasons, the patriarch's not ready to leave. The industry is not in a good place. The market conditions aren't right. The next generation isn't ready to take over. But we all know it's really, really important for the sustainability of this business and for the employees to keep their livelihood, to have the business pass from generation to generation. And that means ownership. It's also psychological for the next generation to have that ownership. And Ryan's going to talk to us today about how you can do that. What are some of the tools? So what strategy did they use? Well, the majority of them used gifts, sale, and you can see some loans. The impact of the pandemic. So let's talk about it because we were actually in it, as I mentioned earlier. 90% of family business owners kept their employees employed, even those that closed their doors. We tell this to members of Congress. Once again, this is who you want to promote in this country. People that retain employees during those very, very difficult times. And in fact, 54% of them actually added jobs and only 11% actually lost jobs. Some of them use remote working, and that seems to be a constant today. Remote working, I think, is here to stay. It varies from industry to industry and company to company. And in terms of the size, 30% of those that responded to the survey have over 100 employees, and 49% have 1 to 50 employees. Their revenues grew in 2021 by 80%, again, during the pandemic, which is pretty incredible. And it grew from their strategic business choices, their industry conditions, and their economic conditions. But notice in this list for 2021, strategic choices are third on the list. But in 2022, they expected their business to grow. 89% of them expected their business to grow. And that growth was going to come from those strategic business choices at the top of the list, and then economic conditions and industry conditions. So again, to restate that, 89% of the businesses believed their business was going to grow in 2022. The revenues, 48% of them have revenues over $20 million for 2022. That's what they expected. Another important statistic for members of Congress. Families give locally. Family businesses donate locally. 76% of their giving is local. So when that family business has to be sold for whatever reason, to pay the estate tax or some other reason, the family loses their livelihood, the employees lose their jobs, but the community loses all of that giving. So let's talk about the risks and impediments, including taxes. Cybercrime certainly is an impediment and a risk. It was a little interesting that 63% of those that responded to the survey have yet to be attacked in some cybercrime. We'll ask the same question in 2023. We'll see what the answer is. Those threats, most of them coming from these phishing attacks or ransomware. Top business risk, really important issue for family business owners to understand their business risk. Recession market turned down at the top of the list, availability of labor, which I'm going to talk about next, an all-time high. We know what the pandemic did with availability of labor and retention, government regulations, and then inflation, which wasn't even on the list before, is number 4. We all know everyone's dealing with inflation and how it's affecting wages and products and all the services. But recruiting and talent retention is the top of the list in terms of the business growth and the impediments going forward into 2022 and 2023. And I hear from my family business owners all the time that they've had to not only pay more money to recruit, they've had to increase their existing employment base in order to just retain those and match the new employees that they're bringing on board. Tax policy, this year, income tax is at an all-time high, 45%. I believe it's at the top of the list from what I talked about earlier. Corporate America is paying a 21% tax rate. Family businesses are still paying 35, 37% because, again, they operate as this pass-through entity. So they're paying ordinary income tax rates. And they are really, really struggling with that. And certainly estate tax is next on the list because we all know that families and family businesses pay estate tax. Corporations don't pay an estate tax. When we asked what they thought about the estate tax, what they'd like to see happen, they all say, well, we'd like to see repeal of the estate tax happen. That's politically and economically not viable today. They'd all want the exemption to be made permanent. And Ryan's going to talk about that as well. It's going to expire at the end of 2025. It was just increased almost 13 million per person. Really encourage people to take advantage of that exemption. And again, Ryan's going to talk about that. And then we asked them about reducing the rate from 40% to 20%, which would help a lot of family businesses in America. And we get support for that as well. And through Policy and Taxation Group, we have actually helped members of Congress to introduce bipartisan legislation that will do exactly that in the House. And I should have also mentioned that both Policy and Taxation Group and Family Enterprise USA are bipartisan organizations and always have been. Economic policy is really important for family businesses. Top of the list, again, is reducing those income tax rates. But second is this federal deficit. You know, family businesses understand what debt does to a business. The government doesn't operate as a business. It doesn't really understand how detrimental the deficit could be, and family business owners understand that. Number three is reducing or eliminating the estate tax. And number four, which is also pretty high on the list most of the time, is reducing regulations. So in concluding my part of this presentation, I want to talk to you about a new development, which is the Congressional Family Business Caucus that we are helping members of Congress to form. It is a bipartisan caucus. It is both, it's bicameral, so it's in the House and the Senate. We have identified over 100 family business members of Congress that own or support or work with family business owners. And we are targeting them to ask them to please join this caucus. We have a shorter list of co-chairs. And I'm happy to tell you that we have secured bipartisan co-chairs in the House, and we're working on securing that bipartisan co-chairs in the Senate. We hope to make an official announcement, press release, after, of course, the elections, which everyone is focused on. And we will have a launch of the Family Business Caucus in hopefully February next year in Washington, D.C. The caucus, as I mentioned, will be bipartisan. It will not be a policy organization. It will educate not only members of Congress, but the media and others about the good work that family businesses do in this country, the jobs that they create, the communities that they support. We will ask family business owners to come to DC and testify and tell their stories. We will do research. We will, again, provide education to all those that will listen, and we really believe it will elevate family businesses in this country. We thought about this because every time we talk to members of Congress, when we say family business, they say small business. We now say generationally owned family business because that's what the voters understand. And we think this caucus will get members of Congress to understand that family businesses are all sizes and all industries, and we really need to support them. So that concludes my remarks. And once again, I can't thank BNY Mellon Wealth Management enough for their support in this survey. They have been a wonderful, wonderful sponsor. I'm now going to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to talk to us about best practices and key takeaways for family enterprises. So Brian, are you viewing the screen?
I am, Pat. I see it. And thank you for the handoff. Hi, everyone. I found those survey results really enlightening. I anticipate you did as well. What I'm going to discuss with you is really the key takeaways from the Family Enterprise USA findings that Pat just went over with you. and discuss some strategies and best practices to deal with the priorities that were emphasized on Pat's presentation there. You know, what came loud and clear through that presentation was taxes, and in particular, first and foremost, income taxes. And secondly, wealth transfer taxes. And when I say wealth transfer taxes, I'm in particular, I mean three things. One is estate tax, two is the gift tax, and three is the generation skipping transfer tax, or what we commonly refer to as GST, the GST tax. So I'm going to walk through these strategies with you, and then I'm going to conclude with a natural segue into family governance. And by family governance, what I mean is discussing the processes, the mindset, the structure for that impact families who are managing and owning a business. Before we get started on the strategies, I want to discuss with you briefly why now is a really good time to engage in thoughtful estate, trust, and tax planning. As Pat referred to, first and foremost, we have something called the lifetime estate and gift tax exemption. Okay, now the lifetime estate and gift tax exemption, what that means is we have essentially a threshold amount, and we can, if we pass away with assets that are beneath that amount, we won't be subject to the estate tax. And the estate tax is high. It's 40% on the amount that exceeds the exemption. So it's pretty penal. This year, in 2022, the exemption amount is $12.06 million per person. So for couples, that's $24.12 million. As Pat alluded to, the amount is going up substantially next year. One of the few benefits we get from inflation. So the amount is going up $860,000 next year. So we're going to have, each person is going to have a lifetime estate and gift tax exemption amount of $12.92 million in 2023. So for a couple, that's $25.84 million. And the amount is anticipated to continue to increase due to inflation. But then, as Pat referred to, on January 1, 2026, the amount is going to drop in half. That's a result of the sunsetting provisions in the Jobs and Tax Cut Act in 2017. So the amount come January 1, 2026 is anticipated to be between 6.5 million and 7 million. So we're going to go down from 13 million next year, probably 14 million by 2025. And then all of a sudden the bottom's going to drop out, right? And we're going to go to 6.5 to 7 million per person. It's use it or lose it. So we have to engage in some thoughtful planning now. So we use that exemption before we lose it on January 1, 2026. People ask, is Congress going to extend that amount? The consensus is it's very unlikely that if we have divided Congress, if we have Democrats and some lever of power in the government, that there's going to be an extension of the current exemption amount. So the expectation is that amount's going to drop to 6.5 to 7 million on January 1, 2026. We have some additional tax provisions in the 2017 Jobs and Tax Cut Act that are also going to sunset, that are going to be detrimental for tax purposes. For instance, the top tax rate for individuals is 37%, and that top tax rate is going to go up to 39.6% come January 1, 2026, right? So there are additional provisions that are going to have a detrimental effect on taxes. Interest rates are, they have gone up, as we all know, but historically they're still really low. The applicable federal rate, which is people refer to the AFR rate, which governs a lot of estate and tax planning, is at 3.3% currently. So by historic standards, it's not where it was last year this time, which was around 1 to 2%, but it's still historically low. So we still can take advantage of low interest rates. And importantly, with the way the economy is right now, asset values are depressed. And that's a good thing for estate and tax planning, right? Because we can pack into the exemption amount more assets, right, at lower values, and get it into that exemption amount and transfer that wealth to avoid, again, the estate and gift tax, which is 40% on the amount that exceeds the exemption. So for all these reasons, now may be the optimal time for family business owners to implement tax efficient strategies to protect the value of their legacy. And that's what most family business owners, according to the survey Pat just went over with you, want. Pat, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start off with income tax, and I'm going to move to wealth transfer tax, and I'm going to conclude with family governance. Now, for income tax planning, really the bread and butter of planning is using irrevocable gifting trusts. And a lot of our clients with irrevocable gifting trusts, essentially you're transferring assets into a trust that's irrevocable. You have to relinquish dominion and control of the assets, and you do so by transferring it into an irrevocable trust. A lot of our clients like doing this with a trust that's cited in a low income tax state or a no income tax state. Delaware is a very popular jurisdiction. Others are Nevada, Wyoming. There's several others. Think about states with no income tax. These states, and in particular Delaware, they have additional attributes that make them ideal jurisdictions to cite a trust. So for instance, trust can last for a long time in perpetuity in some of these states like Delaware. Delaware and some other jurisdictions allow for silent trusts, meaning you have children, you don't want your children to understand everything that's in that trust because you want them to remain motivated and become contributors to society. So in these jurisdictions like Delaware, you don't have to reveal everything that's in the trust to your children or grandchildren. There are additional great asset protection rules. There's some great trust modification rules in these jurisdictions like Delaware. So the idea is you transfer the assets into the irrevocable trust cited in a state like Delaware. The assets within that trust don't incur state income tax because, again, Delaware doesn't have a state income tax. And the assets are allowed to compound and grow. And you have a discretionary right to distributions. Children and grandchildren are commonly the beneficiaries, and the assets are in there to provide for the children if they need those assets. But if they don't, they stay in there and they compound and they grow. And it's just a great vehicle for income tax planning. Next slide, please, Pat. This slide shows you what I just discussed, which are the great attributes of a jurisdiction like Delaware: no income tax, flexible trust modification laws. It's somewhat of an oxymoron to say that an irrevocable trust can be modified, and it is really difficult in a state like California or New York. But in Delaware, you have this flexible ability to do decanting and non-judicial settlement agreements and other ways to modify an irrevocable trust. Asset protection, dynasty trust can last in perpetuity. Directed trusts. So the trustee of a trust in Delaware can have essentially another person who's directing the investment of those assets, could be a family member. Another great attribute of having a trust cited in a state such as Delaware. Pat, next slide, please. This slide really showcases what can happen with the compounding of the interest in that trust if it's cited in a no income tax state like Delaware. Investing $5 million into a Delaware trust, an irrevocable non-grantor trust, its own taxpayer, and over the years you can just see the compounding of those assets versus if you don't gift it out and those assets stay in the family's estates and incur an estate tax at 40% every year as it goes down through the generations. Again, a great vehicle, really the bread and butter of our income tax planning. QSBS, qualified small business stock. So in states like California and Washington and in many other states, QSBS is a really popular topic. QSBS stands for qualified small business stock. If you have QSBS, you're entitled to a $10 million per person exemption per issuer of the stock. So what that means is you can shield $10 million in capital gains from the federal capital gains rate. Now, when you think about income tax, we have for wealth transfer tax, gift tax, and estate tax, 40% rate. As Pat was alluding to, when you look at the capital gain rates, we have 20% as a top level at the federal rate. Then you have a 3.8% net investment income tax. And in some states like California, New York, Hawaii, we have income tax rates over 8, 9, 10%. So you're getting close to that 40% tax rate for wealth transfer. So income tax planning and the top income tax rate for capital gains is very similar to that wealth transfer tax, which emphasizes how important it is to do this income tax planning. So for QSBS, your company needs to be a C Corp. That's critical, right? So the stock that's issued to you has to be a C Corp. You have to hold on to the stock for 5 years. And the value of the assets at the time it's issued to you has to be 50 million or less. There's some other additional qualifications here. You get 100% exclusion of that $10 million exclusion if the shares were issued after September 2010. So keep QSBS in mind when you're thinking about your company, how to form your company. Should I do a C Corp, a pass-through? It may make sense to do a C Corp given the huge exemption you could get for QSBS. Next slide, please, Pat. Okay, there's a really popular strategy in the QSBS world to multiply that 10 million per issuer exemption, and it's called QSBS stacking. And how this works is you use QSBS together with those irrevocable gifting trusts that I just went over. So for instance, if you have 4 children and you set up 4 irrevocable gifting trusts in Delaware, because each of those irrevocable gifting trusts is its own taxpayer, they each get their own $10 million exemption. So now all of a sudden, instead of just having 10 million in exemption for yourself, you've created 4 irrevocable trusts, 1 for each child. You have now multiplied your $10 million exemption to 50 million. And if you have a liquidation event and you sell your QSBS stock and you have 50 million in proceeds, all of that potentially could be excluded from capital gains tax. Really a great strategy to consider. Again, from the get-go of forming an entity, when you're thinking about, should I do C Corp, S Corp, LLC partnership, this favors a C Corp. Next slide, please, Pat. Okay, and this slide really walks you through the math. I'm not going to go through it all with you, but I'm using California as an example. California doesn't have a QSBS exclusion, a state exclusion. New York, on the other hand, does, as does several other states. But taking California, for example, and capital gain from QSBS, and is going to realize that 50 million in gain. They have 4 children. They set up 4 irrevocable trusts. What is the result? The result is, with stacking, setting up these 4 irrevocable trusts, the total tax is 1.33 million. That's the California state tax for the individual. If that California resident didn't stack their QSBS, that 50 million would be subject to over 16 million in tax. So really a great result, a great strategy when you're thinking about really protecting your QSBS from the income tax. Next slide, Pat, please. Okay, now on the other hand, for pass-through entities, we have at the federal level a $10,000 limitation on federal deduction for state and local tax, what we commonly call SALT. This was a big subject in Build Back Better. Eventually, it didn't make it into the Inflation Reduction Act. So folks are limited to $10,000 deduction at the federal level for their state and local taxes. Now, a lot of states have done workarounds. California is one of them. There's several others here. I'm using the California workaround of that SALT limitation. And the workaround essentially allows folks in these states like California that have a workaround to get around the $10,000 federal deduction limitation. And in California, for instance, it's a 9.3% elective tax to the franchise tax board here in California that's credited back to the taxpayer. And this allows someone to deduct more than the $10,000 SALT limitation. The point here is there's now competition, right? Should I do a C Corp, take advantage of QSBS, or instead should I form a pass-through entity, as Pat was talking about, which a lot of you are doing, and take advantage of this SALT workaround limitation. This limitation is set to expire at the end of 2025. The California workaround is set to expire at the end of 2025. But it's really important to sit down and kind of crunch the numbers. We do this here at BNY Mellon to figure out what makes the most sense for you as a business owner. Should I go with a pass-through entity like an LLC, or should I instead do a C Corp? Next slide, please, Pat. And this slide really walks you through a summary of the different types of entities. C Corp, again, you could use QSBS. We have a historically low corporate tax rate at 21%. S Corp, the slide showed a lot of you are doing S Corps to get that pass-through taxation to really simplify your corporate entity. Same thing with the LLC. LLC, the advantage there is there's a least amount of formal reporting and record keeping, so a lot of folks like that. Next slide, please, Pat. Okay, on wealth transfer, there are a lot of great wealth transfer techniques out there to really make sure that you're using your full lifetime estate and gift tax exemption, and for the amount above that lifetime estate and gift tax exemption, making sure you're engaging in some thoughtful planning so your estate tax is really limited or eliminated when you pass away. Next slide, Pat, please. Okay, and one of the most popular things for family business owners to do is to gift interests, minority interests in their family businesses to their children and subsequent generations. The benefit there is you're slowly showing your children through the transfers that they are now having more interest in the company. And importantly, the person who's gifting the minority interest can take discounts up to 30-35% sometimes on the family-owned interests that parents are gifting to their children and to their grandchildren. So by taking these discounts, you're really able to pack in a lot more into your lifetime exemption. A lot of people like to do this through a family limited partnership, for instance, where you can slowly cede control over time to your children and grandchildren when they're ready to take greater ownership in the business, have the maturity to make the decisions. A lot of our clients like to do this as limited partners in irrevocable trusts in which their children are have interest in those irrevocable trusts. Next slide, please, Pat. Okay, and then family governance. This is just a really wonderful topic. When I think of family governance, I really think top of mind of three things. One is educating the next generation, right? Gen 2, your children, and Gen 3, your grandchildren, on wealth, on finances, on management and operation of your family business. You've worked really hard to create a legacy, to build this really successful family business, and now you want to hand it over, and education is really top of mind. Pat, next slide, please. Now, the other two factors are, one, communication. Communication is key. Before I joined BNY Mellon, part of my trust and estate practice was trust and estate litigation. And I can tell you most disputes that happen within families when it comes to an inheritance or wealth transfer happens because there's poor communication. So you want to ensure that those communication flows are happening within the family. There's always a tension between motivating that next generation to be successful members of society, but at the same time, you want to ensure that they have the financial acumen to take on the family business, to be stewards of the family wealth. So it's always a question of, well, how much should I tell my children about what we have? There's no one size fits all answer to that. It's a process. We have a family governance practice here at BNY Mellon. We facilitate meetings, we facilitate family communications. Again, it's a process, it takes time, and there's no one size fits all. I often find a really successful strategy with families when we're talking about trust and estates is to start with being an agent under a power of attorney, or being a trustee under a trust, teaching your children what it means to be a fiduciary, what fiduciary duties mean, and how that works within the larger family context. And then lastly, the other big factor when it comes to family governance is family values, right? We want to impart into our children and grandchildren the family values that made us successful as family business owners. children and grandchildren are going to have different motivations in life, different values. I think what's key is to find what family members have in common. Compromise is always a part of this, working through differences in a constructive way through meetings. And then once we have really kind of worked through the education, the communication, and the values, I think then families are really ready to engage in discussions about family ventures, about projects, about philanthropy, and doing so in really a non-biased, objective way, because we've worked through the process of, communication and working through the differences in values. So this slide really kind of walks you through successful families and the way it works with successful families. And I love the Chinese proverb here: govern a family as you would cook a small fish, very gently. Next slide, please, Pat. This slide really hits home on what typically happens when you don't do the work, when you don't do the education, when you don't do the communication and the imparting of the family values. We see it time and time again that the wealth from Gen 1 to Gen 3 slowly evaporates, which again underscores that doing the work is critical. Next slide, please, Pat. And then here, again, the 5 steps to healthy family governance. I walk through it with you. First, education. 2, communication. 3, family values. 4, then we can start doing the family ventures and projects. And lastly, 5, we hit that point as a family business, as a family as a whole, where we're proceeding all on the same page in a very objective, non-biased fashion. So, Pat, with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ryan. It was some excellent information. I've stopped sharing the slides so that we can all just have a conversation. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I actually have a question for each of you. So I'm going to start with you, Ben. So these are really difficult economic times that we're all facing. Inflation, people are concerned about their jobs, recession potential next year. Mortgage rates are going up, interest rates going up. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of concern. So I'm sure, as a wealth advisor, you have to advise your families during these really difficult times, especially kind of alleviate some of their emotional stress when you can't do anything about some of the market factors, right? So what advice are you giving your family clients, and are you changing any of your investment strategies or portfolio management strategies?
Well, it's a great question, Pat. A lot to unpack there. I'll kind of take it all back to the slide I shared in the discussion I had around active wealth, right? The kind of having a plan, whether it relates to investing, whether it relates to managing taxes, whether it relates to borrowing, spending, and protecting your assets. Kind of having a long-term plan is really, really critical to help navigate right through these periods of uncertainty. I think as it relates to kind of specifically the investment markets, financial markets, I'll draw folks' attention. Our chief investment officer hosted a client call yesterday, and if you go to BNY Mellon Wealth.com, I think you can get a link to a replay of that, kind of talking through all the specificities. But what I would say from an investment strategy, kind of coming into 2022, we were preparing for volatility in our clients' portfolio. So I would say we were more defensive than we had been over the last number of years. Having said that, obviously it's been a very challenging market when we've had 3 consecutive quarters of both the S&P 500 and the Bloomberg Ag, which is a fixed income bond market index down. So 3 consecutive quarters, which is the first time that's happened since that fixed income index was published, I think 40 some odd years. So very, very challenging market environment. And so again, bringing it back, you mentioned kind of emotions and trying to alleviate or kind of manage through what can be very emotional time when asset prices are depressed. And again, taking it back to reminding clients of what their long-term plan is. There are opportunities, right? We talk about making lemonade out of lemons. Some of the strategies that Ryan discussed as it relates to gifting. With depressed assets, you get a better, there's even better opportunity, right, to work through that. So, we like to say, when you've met one client, you've met one client, right, in terms of really understanding their goals. So really kind of staying disciplined. It's if you don't have a plan coming through markets like this, it can be very easy to get whipsawed, right? Whether it's from an investment perspective, from a borrowing, spending, whatnot. So really kind of taking it back, and that's really the process that we do. And then obviously marrying that, particularly for our family business owners and private business owners, recognizing that they're managing potentially through challenging, business environment as well. So what resources and what can we, what disciplines can we, help them, work through in this environment? I think is really, really critical.
Well, so as a follow-up question to that, I know each client's portfolio is customized to their needs and their goals and objectives, as you talked about. But is there anything that you're doing in terms of your asset allocation differently? Are you more defensive in some asset classes than others? Anything that you could share with us around the portfolio allocation?
Yes. So Pat, I'd probably go back to a couple of years ago. We started talking about kind of that traditional 60-40 mix. So 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Historically, that's kind of been the bellwether portfolio from a diversified, perspective. And we talked about some of the challenges that we were seeing to that, towards that portfolio, particularly just given kind of where interest rates were at that, at that point, kind of coming out of the last decade, where we saw exceptionally high, higher public market rates of return, and just kind of as we look to kind of the next decade, recognizing that we probably needed to revisit that kind of long-term traditional 60-40 mix. And so really advocating for the use of alternatives, what we call diversifiers in our portfolio. So whether that's hedge funds that are not just long the market but can be short the market or be more nimble, private markets. So obviously, our business owners are very familiar with private markets, but investing right through private equity funds, really, really important as it relates to kind of just the current market environment. Again, as I alluded to, we were pretty defensive, or we made some defensive moves coming into this year, whether it's shortening up duration within our fixed income portfolios, which basically means getting shorter on the curve, which can insulate some of the negative returns that one has seen. On the equity side, again, just from an asset allocation, being more domestic, being up in quality in terms of the types, the types of stocks. These were kind of things we were talking with. Obviously with the market levels where we're at today, we don't feel there's one should be reacting to this and getting more defensive. In fact, from a bottom-up perspective, there's probably opportunities presenting themselves. But again, kind of back to this being diversified, embracing alternative assets, whether it's hedge funds, commodities, private real estate, private equity investments, we think will be will stand the good test here going forward for our clients.
Thank you. That's a great answer. So Ryan, I'm going to ask the last question of you. You and I both know how important estate planning is, especially in these critical times, especially with the exemption at an all-time high and expiring at the end of 2025. How can BNY Mellon Wealth Management help their families to do this planning? Do you actually do the planning with them? Do you work with attorneys to help them with the planning? Maybe you can kind of walk us through that process and express the urgency, because we're here at year end, right? And a lot of estate attorneys are very, very busy. So how do we cope with all that?
Yeah, Pat, great question. So we really do both, right? So we are strategists within BNY Mellon Wealth Management, and we work with our clients on strategies, on the pros and cons of different approaches to doing both, your foundational estate planning as well as your second level income tax and wealth transfer planning. There's a menu of options out there on what you can do at that second level. And we really walk through with them that menu of options. We really try to look at their particular situation, and every family is different. Their asset mix, their goals and objectives, their family makeup, to figure out which of these strategies makes the most sense from a tax perspective for their other objectives, including family governance. And we walk them through that. And we essentially act as a family office. We bring in folks that are a right fit, both estate planners who are out there who will do the drafting, we don't do the drafting, as well as a CPA, other folks that may be needed, M&A lawyers, other types of advisors. And it's a process, especially that second level planning is a process. You know, through that process, the clients really learn a lot, and we all get on the same page. So by the time we're bringing in the outside advisors, we've made quite a bit of headway on their planning objectives. Yes, the urgency should be emphasized. We have January 1, 2026 as the date the exemption is going to drop. Don't wait until 2025. The reason I say that is, you know, there's a finite set of planners out there who do the sophisticated estate planning work, and they're going to be very busy come 2025. Also, valuations are going to be needed for gifting, and that takes time. So now is the time to do the planning. And again, it's an optimal time, right? We have depressed values, as both Ben and Pat mentioned. Interest rates are still low. And in addition to the exemption dropping on January 1, 2026, we have these other tax provisions that are also going to be going into effect that are going to have a detrimental impact on our clients from a tax perspective, like that top tax bracket going up from 37 to 39.6%.
Thank you. That's a great answer to the question. And I concur with all of your comments. So we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. This webinar is being recorded. It's going to be sent out to everyone, not only on this webinar, but on our email list as well. And I believe BNY Mellon Wealth Management will do the same. So again, I want to thank you all. I'm going to turn it over to Ben, just in the event you have some closing comments. You're on mute, Ben.
You would think after all this time, I'd remember the mute button. No, Pat, really just want to thank you and your team and Family Enterprise USA for the continued collaboration. Again, you shared some great insights from this year's survey, which you know, we can attest in our conversations with our clients, and just the work that you all do advocating is really, really critical. And so just appreciate the partnership and appreciate the opportunity to present with Ryan today.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on the call. Thank you everyone that's been on the webinar with us and participating. Everybody have a great day. Take care.